All right, well, this week marks the launch of Ash Wednesday. And Mark Wahlberg and Jonathan Roumie open up about their faith, sacrifice, spiritual discipline while they were on Fox News. This is pretty incredible to see. They did this several years ago. But if you guys don't know, Ash Wednesday, the opening of Lent, it occurs 7 weeks before Easter. And its name is from the ancient church practice of applying ashes to believers' heads as an outward expression of repentance. So this carries a symbolic weight. Usually there's palm fronds blessed the previous years from Palm Sunday. They're burned and the resulting ashes are placed on the altar. During the service, a cross is marked on worshippers' forehead with ashes while they hear the words, "Remember, O man, and unto dust thou shalt return." A stark reminder of human mortality and dependence on God. Okay, so it's 40 days before Easter, excluding Sundays. It always occurs on a Wednesday. The day inaugurates Lent, a period intended for self-denial, moderation, fasting, abandoning sinful habits. Most Catholic and Protestant denominations observe it, although the Eastern Orthodox Church begins Lent differently on Clean Monday instead. Okay, so this is something that's primarily done by Catholics and some Protestants. I got a buddy of mine that's doing it. Those of you guys like, Ruslan, are you doing Lent or are you starting anything? I'll tell you what I'm doing here in a second, but let's play this clip of them on Fox News talking about faith. Jonathan Roumie, Jonathan and Jesus, by the way, it's a dope docuseries on Amazon. And she kind of hits him with the same framing we see in much of that docuseries. Check this out.
Jonathan, when you go out in public, I'm sure everyone, it has to be a little bizarre because when I see you, I see Jesus because you play Jesus in a show that I watch constantly.
No pressure, but
not at all. But you play the best Jesus I think I've ever seen because you're so kind and loving and God's using your eyes. It's almost like the love just radiates out of you without even speaking. It's such a fascinating, wonderful show, and I've learned so much more about the Bible watching you, so thank you so much. When you go out in public...
And by the way, at the time of this release of this video, I'll actually be at ChosenCon, so if there's any chance that you're seeing this video and you're at ChosenCon, come say hello to me. I love The Chosen. I love my buddy Dallas Jenkins, friend of the channel, big supporter of theirs. And so I'll be out there this weekend. And so, this is a lot of pressure for Jonathan. So let's see how he responds to this.
What do people say to you? Do they say thank you for your faith?
A lot of people thank me for the work that I've done with the show. And some people want to just hug me because they for them, it's that the closest they feel that they will get to what it might be like to hug Jesus, which is cool. Sometimes it's, depending on the situations and where I am, it might be a little uncomfortable, but I ultimately, I know where their heart's at, and it's just a blessing and a gift for me to be able to kind of be able to transmit God's love and his compassion towards people, that they can feel it through by watching a show and then see me and feel like they have that same kind of license and openness to be able to just approach me as if I was actually Jesus. So.
I love his answers to this, and I love that. I think from the outside looking in, it probably gets hard and probably even weird for him sometimes. So this dude is a class act. The way he answered that was awesome. That he can. It's not that he is Jesus. It's that he can extend God's love to people as they see him and often are reminded of the show that they watch, right? Jesus. And so it's not necessarily they're worshiping him, but they see him playing the character of Jesus, and there's a connection there. And I love how down to earth he seems in answering this sort of question. And again, watching that docuseries, I ended up really appreciating Jonathan's temperament and the way he navigates all of this, because it has to be a lot just to be a guy that was an actor and then becoming the character of Jesus. And then the show is one of the biggest shows in the world. Not sure if you guys know that. Like, whenever it drops on Amazon Prime, like, it's always within the top 10. So that has to be a lot of pressure for someone like Jonathan. But he seems to be really rolling with the punch as well. I love that answer. Let's see what else is said here.
The best role because you're getting closer to Christ. That's just inevitable.
Oh, yeah.
You're reading the scripture all the time. You're memorizing the scripture for your role. How challenging is that for you, though, when you have to get the scripture perfect? You can't ad-lib
Yeah, we there are portions of the story that are for necessity, creative liberties because certain parts of the Gospels are just so short, and so if we're building characters that are based on like one paragraph in the New Testament, it's like, okay, well, we have to invent a storyline that works, but it's in the spirit of the Gospel, so we're never trying to violate or go against the Gospel. But we're also not the Bible,
Yeah,
So
I love how you answer that. Yes, because that's a lot of people's biggest critique of The Chosen is like, hey, I didn't know that was in the Bible. The things that get me going to the Bible, I am shocked by, like, wow, I can't believe that's in the Bible, right? Like that's really cool. Whereas a lot of the character development, I don't know. I guess I've just been reading the Bible long enough to know what's definitely not in there. But I'm always intrigued and surprised by reading through and seeing the stuff that is in there. Season 5 was absolutely phenomenal. They did the Last Supper. And so, yeah, I think he's smart in saying, yes, we're not trying to go against the Gospels, but we're also not the Bible. And they put that disclaimer at the beginning of every show, as well as House of David does as well. And so that's a great answer from Jonathan.
The Bible is your primary source. And we're trying to bring people closer to God and to the Bible by giving them a living depiction. Mm-hmm. And for me, it has brought me closer to my faith, and it has made me want to be the best version of myself. Mm-hmm.
So, Mark, you're raising a family. I'm sure you're teaching your children all about your faith and to really to sacrifice during Lent. But how exciting is it in 40 days? We'll celebrate Easter and Jesus' resurrection.
It's amazing. With my children, at first, obviously, because I never got a, faith-based education, that's all I wanted for my children. And then I felt like, well, maybe it's not the best thing for them at a time. Like I didn't want to force it on them. So now I just try to be an example. Mm-hmm. They know that Dad can't miss Mass, that, everything's the day has to start on my hands and my knees, and that I rely on God and my faith for many, many things. And hopefully that will be the thing that they kind of gravitate towards.
Have you seen them?
Yeah, that's awesome. Mark Wahlberg just opened a store out here, by the way, in Oceanside, called Municipal. And they're literally like a block away from my church in Oceanside. And speaking of Oceanside, I got to make sure you guys know, Bless God Summit, 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away. Myself, Wes Huff, Mike Winger, Michael Knowles, Gavin Ortland, God Logic. I'm telling you, if you aren't coming to this event, you're playing yourself. VIP is completely sold out. There's going to be an in-person 3-day event happening March 5th, 6th, and 7th in Oceanside, right down the street from Mark Wahlberg's store, actually. Municipal. Shout out to Municipal. They got a really cool spot out there. So this is happening. We have tickets left. You can also apply for a scholarship if you're local, or you can get yourself here. And we just announced virtual tickets. So virtual tickets are available right now over at blessgod.co. $75. You get the full live stream experience, the replays, all the sessions you can come back to, available on the virtual ticket. blessgod.co. All right, let's jump back into this conversation.
Many, many things, and hopefully that will be the thing that they kind of gravitate towards.
Have you seen them?
Yeah, I think having kids and providing an education for them that's Christ-centered, but also living it out for them, it has to be and both. So it sounds like he's gone. He's really focusing on the personal development side of his faith, which is great, and he's also provided Christian education for them. So she's asking him questions about his family. I'm curious if this is off script or not, because I've never really heard Mark talk about his family like that.
Gravitate toward it?
To a certain extent, yes. Yeah, but again, I don't make them go to Mass. My parents used to they didn't go to Mass, but they made us go to Mass, and we'd go to church, get a missal ad, go to the park, and run around, do whatever we were doing, then come home and act like we went. But obviously, when I needed God, and there were people that were there to influence me in the right direction, and once I realized how important it was, I never strayed away from that.
That's interesting. His parents made him go to Mass, and he appreciates it, but he doesn't make his kids go to Mass. Listen, I don't know how old his kids are. My kids go to church, and they're going to go to church as long as they're under my roof. So that might be something me and Mark disagreed with, unless his kids are grown and moved out. Okay, yeah, his kids are, some of them are grown and some of them are teenagers. A little bit different. Listen, if you're a teenager in my household, you're going to church every Sunday.
That's amazing. That's great. It's definitely making a difference. My dad was the same way. If we spent the night out one weekend, he picked us up on Sunday. We either had to go to church with them or church with my dad, and I am so grateful that he laid that foundation for me. My life didn't change until I was 21 in college. But that foundation is really helpful. So I'm really proud of you.
So the reason they have the ashes is to symbolize that we come from ashes, we'll go back to ashes, right? We see it used in the Old Testament, but some would push back and say, hey, maybe Ash Wednesday is a public displaying of something that should be private. But I think there's something beautiful about representing Jesus, right? That's a bold statement to have the ash on your forehead. Now, I personally, my church has never really done Ash Wednesday. I'm not opposed to it. I've already been in a fast. I haven't shared this publicly, but I've been off of caffeine now for, going on a week and a half. And if you guys know me, you know I love my yerba mates. I haven't done any yerba mates since last Monday, and I feel good. And I was overdoing it, and I needed a cleanse. And so it kind of lines up with this thing. I don't know if I'm gonna go the full 40 days. I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. I'll probably do 3 weeks, no caffeine, and slowly ease my way in. So that's been my sacrifice, and that's really been my sacrifice because I want to make sure that I'm making the most of my time, talent, and treasure in light of everything that's happening in the world, in light of all the uncertainty, in light of all the craziness. That's what a lot of my book, Godly Ambition, is about, unlocking the full potential of your time, talent, and treasure. That's a USA Today bestseller, by the way. You can get it on Amazon or go to blessgod.co. But I want to make sure that I'm controlling the variables that I can control. And that brings us to our next topic, which is like, in light of all the Epstein stuff, in light of all the craziness that's happening on the internet, in light of everything that's going on, there has been a hijacking of this conversation from all sorts of sides. And I wanted to take a moment to speak right into it because I'm concerned for many of us in terms of how much we're consuming the rage bait and the doom scrolling. And so the remainder of this conversation, we're going to go deep, and it might challenge you, but I think it might also be very encouraging for you as well to consider how all this stuff works together, and how ultimately, if you're following Jesus, your life should be one of surrender and devotion. And that means that you may get distracted from time to time, but hopefully we keep coming back to the choice that we have to follow Jesus every single day. If you haven't been keeping up lately, everybody is claiming Epstein as an asset or tool for whoever their opposition is. At this point, Epstein has been working for everybody.
Was Epstein a Mossad agent? New files deepen mystery over Israeli links.
The whole Epstein files are showing the extent of connections between Epstein and Russia.
The title of this one is Child Sex Trafficking. Co-conspirators, fully redacted.
So I've been wanting to share some of my thoughts about this and kind of organize them in a way that I think is important. And that's what I'm going to do in the first segment of this video. But this was inspired by a new creator I recently stumbled across. And by the way, I enjoy listening to folks I disagree with. This is a creator named Barry's Economics. Now, Barry's Economics is inspired by Gary's Economics, who I've reacted to. And his story is he was bankrupt, 17 years as a comedian, spent 5 years squatting, sometimes homeless, and then he built a successful Angel Comedy, one of London's most popular and successful comedy clubs. So that sounds awesome. I can't wait to hopefully visit that comedy club next time I'm in London. But he said the breakthrough came when he unlearned the lie that my poverty was my fault. And he's inspired by Gary's Economics, and that's the kind of stuff he's been talking about. And so I stumbled across the channel, and there's a lot of really good stuff in this video that I wanted to highlight. Then there's some things I wanted to push back, and then I wanted to connect it to scripture and some broader studies. Okay, so this is Barry at the 59-second mark. Check this out.
I'm obsessing with the monsters. I keep forgetting about the factory that made the monsters. And like that factory, it's still running.
Okay, so he is going to make an argument that there is a factory that's creating monsters, and then essentially every single one of us is complicit in this factory. So what I love about this is he breaks down the neuroscience based on a study that was done several years ago by Dominique de Quavon. The deeper question that he was exploring is what happens to our brain when someone wrongs someone. And so here is him kind of breaking down that study and how it connects to much of what is potentially happening with regards to the Epstein files today.
So he set up an economic game where one player could betray the other player. Then he gave the betrayed person the opportunity to punish the betrayer. And then, when that person then punished the betrayer, he scanned their brain. And what he found is that when people punish the wrongdoer,
their dorsal striatum lit up like a fireworks show. The dorsal striatum is the brain's reward center.
It's the same region that fires when you eat chocolate, and it's the same region that lights up with addictive. So punishing a wrongdoer gives you a hit of dopamine, like justice, or what feels like justice, is neurologically identical to a drug.
So this is very interesting. Outrage activates reward centers in our brain. Outrage can become neurological reinforcement. And engaging with content online that reinforces said outrage isn't just a drug, it often makes us feel like justice is being served. I think my issue with his video though is, and in much of the videos, is that this Epstein thing is being taken and can point to any quote unquote factory of monsters and put the attention and spotlight there. But before we get there, let's look at another study he highlights with regards to some of the science behind this.
In 2016, David Chester and Nathan DeWall at the University of Kentucky showed that retaliatory aggression activates the nucleus accumbens, which is not just the reward system, but the addiction system, which is the same circuitry implicated in cocaine and heroin dependence. So every time that you see a headline about Epstein's client list, every time you share a post naming names, every time you imagine these people being arrested, your brain feels like it's giving you a hit. But neurologically, it's closer to a fix.
Okay, so that's fascinating that outrage can become neurological reinforcement.
The dopamine fades, the outrage needs refreshing. So you need a new name, a new revelation, a new monster. While your brain is lighting up with righteous fury at the monster, at the same time, it's going dark in response to the system that created that monster.
So here is where the video takes a turn, right? He goes from talking about real travesties and real terrible things with the Epstein thing, connecting it to much of the internet rage bait culture, and then says, yeah, but the real danger is that you're ignoring the bigger issue, which is the systems, right? Now, we're gonna get into some mental health aspects about the system and this sort of thinking here in a moment. But I do find it interesting that almost anyone can make this Epstein thing into whatever boogeyman they want to make it into. And so where he's going to take this video is he's basically going to connect it to the broader economic system of capitalism in the West, if you will. Right? And so if outrage is a drug and monster hunting feels like justice, in my opinion, the real danger isn't capitalism per se. I think capitalism has its flaws, or blaming everything on they, them, and the system. What we're getting into is emotional self-righteousness replacing responsibilities, right? These lists coming out, they feel like justice, but they don't have any sort of sacrifice for us. No one is actually getting dealt with, right? So with regards to the macro system, you can't choose all the things out there in the system and the Federal Reserve and what's happening with inflation. But you can choose what you do today. Every single one of us can choose what we do today. Because I think ultimately the deeper issue that's not being addressed is a couple things. One, what is the condition of the human? Like the condition of the human being left to their own devices. What then happens when humans get access to excess? What happens when people who are, hopefully we'd agree, are broken and sinful, get access to power and no accountability? And then how does that impact society as a whole? To simplify this, it's everyone out there and it's the external issues that are impacting us, I think is a backwards way of looking at it. I think it's humans that, because of our sinfulness, then get power and sin against other people, and other people become hurt by these things, right? So I think the world, this is a worldview issue conversation, and that's why I'm talking about it. But I did want to tie this into a passage of scripture. I was reading Joshua recently, and this is Joshua 24, towards the end of Joshua's life. Joshua has taken the people into the promised land, and he's reminding them of their legacy. He's reminding them of where God has taken them from, being slaves in Egypt, to where God has taken them to. And in this reminder, he says this to them. And this is interesting. So they're in the promised land. They have the life that the generations before them didn't have, right? And Joshua says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. What happened, if you guys didn't know, is that this was probably a 10 to 40 day journey, but it ended up having the people wander in the desert for 40 days, because even though the people came out of Egypt Egypt didn't come out of the people. And so a generation basically had to die off until they were able to enter the promised land, right? Which is really interesting to think about. And then in verse 15, he says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And so there's this clear choice that they have the life that their parents and grandparents didn't have. Generations ago, they were slaves. Now they've entered the promised land, the land of Canaan, and they're still having to be reminded of the things that God has taken them through, which I think when we remember what God has done, it should instill a degree of gratitude in us, right? And then he's tying this into, you get to choose. Like every single person gets to choose this day whom you're going to serve. And so I think when we start talking about systems and structures, those could be legitimate critiques. And even if I were to grant every single ism under the sun, every single boogeyman that Epstein was associated with, that still doesn't change the reality of every single person has agency. Every single person has responsibility. Every single person has an opportunity in this space and time, in the era that we're living in, never been a time like this before, to usher in so much good, to really be the hands and feet of Jesus on this side of eternity. Every single one of us can step into that. But instead, what happens is we love the rage bait and we love to feel like we're doing something without really doing anything. But at the end of the day, it comes back to stewardship. What are we stewarding and who are we choosing to follow, right? And that's outside of whatever structural economic issues that we're embracing. When I got married in 2008, the 2008 recession hit. A lot of us who are like millennials are scarred by that. And that has impacted our psyche, right? Coming out of college, getting married, starting a life, and then everything kind of hitting the fan, people not hiring. That was a pretty rough season of time. But that doesn't mean that we, as a young married couple, didn't do the things that we needed to do to improve our situation and be faithful with the life that God has given us, right? So we went through a whole gnarly debt-free journey where we just took hyper responsibility for all of our situation and ended up, we found ourselves $100,000 in debt. Much of that was because of our foolish decisions. And then also we were able to get out of debt in 18 months by putting our head down and working really hard and following the Ramsey baby steps. And that completely changed the trajectory of our lives, right? We chose what we were going to do. And we already knew that, man, our lives coming from broken families, I was a refugee, our lives were already better than our parents. And I think when you forget and you don't take time to reflect and have gratitude, as we see in Joshua 24, often we lose sight of the plot and focus all the attention out there instead of looking in here and saying, what can we take responsibility of? And the big idea is simply, if your worldview says everything is controlled by the system and the elites, what you're doing indirectly is building a depression agent. But we're going to come back to that here in a second. I wanted to highlight this NYU study that he talks about, where you talk about fairness and compassion and all these sorts of things, and some false conclusions that I think that are made with regards to how one views the world versus how one is engaging with human suffering.
In 2020, Shahzad Gordazi and Eric Knowles at NYU published a study in the journal Nature Communications. They showed participants footage of genuine human suffering, real homelessness. And then they didn't just ask how people felt, they measured it physiologically. Skin conductance to measure stress, facial electromyography, the tiny electrical signals in the muscles that furrow your brow when you feel distressed. Now, before they did that test, they asked the participants whether they believed in the current economic system and whether it was fair or not. Now, the people that said beforehand that they believe the economic system is fundamentally fair, the people who buy into the idea that hard work gets rewarded, their bodies responded less. Their brows didn't furrow. Their skin conductance stayed flat. Their nervous system treated footage of homeless people the way yours treats wallpaper, which means that the belief that the system is fair had physically numbed them to the suffering that the system produces. Not as a choice, but at the level of autonomic nervous system. So they're not choosing to do that. The nervous system didn't respond. So if you put both of those findings together, your brain gives you a dopamine reward for punishing individual monsters and makes monster hunting feel like winning. And at the same time, your brain suppresses your emotional response to systemic suffering, which is the perfect recipe for a population, all of us, that is permanently outraged at individuals and permanently passive about structures.
Now, did you notice the sleight of hand there, right? He points out a study that is talking about a physiological response to seeing human suffering, and how if you believe the world is fair, your body is not going to react the same. Okay, now that's a fascinating study, but here's the issue, I think, is that a physiological response doesn't necessarily equal moral indifference. A brow furrow is not compassion. Just because your nervous system reacts to something, an image, in a certain way, that does not make you more noble or more virtuous. You know what's compassion? Action is compassion. Making the most of your life so that you can be of help to other people who have perhaps had it harder in life, perhaps have gone through certain ways they've been sinned against, that maybe it was no fault of their own that they ended up in the situation that they're in. That is actual compassion. Being able to help other people is compassion. Feeling something in your nervous system or reacting a certain way doesn't indicate whether someone's actually doing anything to help fix the issue, right? And in my opinion, this is where the idea that it's all the system, we need to tear it all down, we need to restructure it, completely falls apart, because his argument, his thesis here is basically that inequality creates the factory of abuse. And again, you could fill in a blank for inequality for whatever you want, right? People are saying Epstein was a KGB asset, and the communism was the factory of abuse. Okay, the total opposite of what he's arguing. You could say Israel then creates this factory of abuse. You could say the United States intelligence agencies created this factory of abuse. You could, fill in a blank, and you could say anything you want there. Okay, the issue is whether the world is fair and equal to everybody, in my opinion, is the wrong place to point the blame on all of this. The deeper issue is, what can we do to make the world a better place? How can we manage the things we've been given to make the world a better place? And so, yes, extreme wealth concentration exists, right? Federal Reserve talks about how the top 1% hold a significant wealth share. There's no denying that, right? But when you look at the actual raw wealth stats, there's a lot that's being left out of these sorts of conversations. And it's not to say that wealth is the North Star. There's a lot of wealthy people that aren't happy. There's a lot of people that are struggling, even though they have good incomes, right? And so these things are more complicated than just, we need more stuff and therefore we will be more happy. But this notion that because some people view that our current system is fair, therefore they're apathetic towards human suffering, I think is just not a through line, in my opinion. Perhaps what's happening is they aren't reacting the same way because they are contributing and know the ways they can contribute to help better situations in their real life, like most of us with resources actually do, right? Those of us who have should give. And when you give, you know that, hey, I'm actually contributing something to what's happening in the world, to the injustices of the world and the way that how people are dealing with different situations. But this conclusion that because inequality exists, or because we all aren't equal outcome based, that therefore it is a factory in which create these monsters like Jeffrey Epstein, I think is a terrible assessment. And I think when we look at the data specifically around income inequality and wealth in general in the United States, if anything, especially those of us who are followers of Jesus, it should encourage us, because there's never been a time like this to be alive ever. And no, it's not perfect. And no, it's not fair for everybody. But there's never been a better time to be alive, to contribute something helpful and help other people. Okay, now I want to get into some of these claims about income inequality, and then we're going to talk about wealth inequality and the things that are often left out with regards to this conversation from the socialist types that want to overthrow the system, reform the system, fix the system, all these sorts of things. And then we're going to get into the mental health aspect of it. Okay, so this is a channel that I enjoy. It's called Reason TV. I don't fully endorse and stamp everything they talk about on the channel. It's a kind of a libertarian leaning channel. But on this video specifically, this is titled, Do We Have an Income Inequality Problem? And I want to play some of this to help us understand what's actually happening in society as a whole and where our money is really going. Okay, check this out.
And when calculating inequality in the United States, the Census Bureau does not factor in two very important things: taxes and redistribution. Census income is assessed pre-tax. That is to say, if you earn $100,000 a year and you pay $20,000 a year in taxes, the Census Bureau does not say you took home $80,000. They just look at your pre-tax income, not the after-tax disposable income you wasted on your midlife crisis. Meanwhile, the federal government redistributes those taxes to the lowest quintile of Americans through various programs. None of that stuff is factored into the inequality statistics either.
Interesting, right? So one, what he's getting at is that what is talked about with income inequality, and we're talking about just about income inequality. And by the way, this should give you hope that like the system's not rigged, okay? That a lot of the stuff that you're hearing is just really misinformation or stuff that's omitting stuff. So when we're talking about this conversation specifically, that people aren't factoring in taxes, and they're not factoring in when those taxes are taken out, that a big chunk of our federal budget, 60% goes to, you call them safety net programs, entitlement programs, stuff like food aid, SNAP, welfare, Social Security. Social Security people pay into, but over 60% go back into programs that are safety net programs. When you look at those numbers, all of a sudden the income, when you factor in taxes, isn't such a crazy disparity of income, right? That's good. That means that much of the issue that people are complaining about is really overstated and exaggerated. Now you're going to talk about billionaires and wealth. We're going to get there in a second, okay? But let's let this video finish.
There are over 100 federal programs that redistribute more than $100 million each through transfer payments. The Census Bureau counts only 8 of those as income.
Right. So we're not talking about Medicaid. We're not talking about housing subsidies, EITC, SNAP. None of those are being talked about, right? And they're not showing up in the numbers because they don't count as income.
Majority of state and local transfer payments are not counted by the census either. In fact, 2/3 of all government transfer payments to individuals and households are not counted as income by the census, and therefore do not enter the equation for determining inequality.
And so the question you got to ask is, does that raise the materials living standards of people who are on these programs? And I think that the obvious answer would be an absolute yes, that there's absolutely a raising of the material standards for folks who are experiencing this, right? And so when people are quoting inequality, they're usually talking about market income, but they're not factoring the 60% that's going back into these different programs.
When you add up government transfers through direct checks and in-kind benefits like food stamps, the average household in the bottom quintile of earners receives somewhere around $40,000 of income redistribution, which again, we do not factor into official government inequality statistics.
That's a lot. That's a lot, okay? So there's a lot of programs out there. There's a lot of ways out there, and some of that, DOGE, and they've been trying to adjust it, but there's a lot of safety net programs already that exist.
So, if you are worried about inequality, tax rich people more literally cannot fix inequality as understood in America. According to our stats, if you tripled taxes on the rich, inequality would be exactly the same. Assuming the rich don't just move to Galt's Gulch or Heaton's Hollow or the Warren Buffett tax dodge zone and water park. But what about Europe, you ask irritatingly? Well, American taxation is more progressive than Europe. Rich people in the United States fund a larger percentage of our government than wealthy European vampires do. Europeans pay higher taxes, but not because they pulp their rich, because they tax their middle class higher than ours, and also have a higher sales tax, which just...
And by the way, for folks who want more safety net programs here, say you want something like universal healthcare, right? Everyone should have healthcare provided for free, or you want free college. That's fine. The issue is you're going to have to move towards a European system where you're paying more in taxes, like as an average income earner, middle class people are going to pay more in taxes, and you're going to pay more in VAT taxes, which is basically a higher sales tax. Okay, so that if that's where people want to move, everyone has to be able to pay that, and just lying and telling people that you could just tax the rich and fix the system, that's not going to do it. Everyone's going to have to pay more, and yet there's still issues in Europe. That's where our buddy Barry's economics lives. That's where Gary's economics live, is they live in the parts that actually have these wider distribution of taxes across the middle class.
Impacts the poor. And if your solution is, well, in that case, let's force corporations to pre-distribute profits more equally, the Census Bureau also does not count income from employer benefits, like health insurance premiums, dental and vision insurance, HSAs, or FSAs.
Okay, so this is important for folks who say, hey, well, income hasn't gone up. I'll say inflation has been really bad in the last several years. But here's the part that people don't know, is as an employer, and I have people that work for me, I am actually incentivized and get a better deal by contributing towards programs like these in getting a flat write-off than I am in just giving my employees higher raises. Because when I give my employees more raises, I have to pay more taxes on that. There's a half of the taxes that the business pays, and then the people on the other side, the employees, also pay taxes on it, right? So I actually pay more in taxes versus if I get our guys all the best health insurance, which we all have really good health insurance, that actually counts as a flat line write-off. Like it just counts as a loss versus having to pay more taxes. So if you're paying somebody like, hey, I want to pay them an extra $5,000 a month, well, that might cost you $2,000 a month in taxes, right? Versus, hey, I'm going to get everybody the best health insurance at $5,000 a month, just a flat $5,000 a month, not 5 plus 7 when you factor in the taxes. I'm using very rough numbers, okay? So all of these things actually impact how much people are making. And when you factor in the benefits, the health, the dental, the vision, HSA, all these things, some studies that I've looked at suggest that the incomes, when you factor these in, actually have gone up in the last 30, 40, 50 years when you factor in how the government benefits and what tax breaks they give to employers.
Now, you can argue, and I would argue, that we spend our taxes in stupid ways, like corn subsidies, upward transfers of wealth, military parade, or that we could better allocate resources to genuinely help people who need it. I agree, but the problem here is competently spending our already massive budget.
So that's just on the income side. Now, some people say, well, Ruslan, there's generational wealth. Generational wealth, that the rich just keep getting richer. The fact that they leave out about generational wealth, specifically in America, is that 70%, this according to the Williams Group, okay, they did a study. They found out that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation. 90% by the third generation, okay? So that means if you have wealth, that's usually going to be gone within 3 generations. 90% lose it within 3 generations. This is why someone like Anderson Cooper, who's a Rothschild, grew up in pretty modest means and didn't have a huge, elaborate trust fund baby, right? He grew up, from my understanding, fairly lower middle class with a single mom, right? It's because though he's a Rothschild, that money, by the time it came around to his mom, was already wasted and squandered. That's the part that people also, forget about. So it's not that we have this crazy aristocracy in the United States. Most generational wealth is gone within a couple generations. Another thing that people leave out is most millionaires and billionaires, 65% of billionaires, 79% of millionaires meaning you just have $1 million net worth. Not that you necessarily have $1 million in the bank, you have $1 million net worth. Dave Ramsey, Ramsey Solutions did a huge study, the biggest study of millionaires, 10,000 plus participants, found out that 75% of them had received no inheritance at all. Meaning that 79% of millionaires are first generation rich. I believe that number for billionaires in America is about 65%, okay? So when you look at the number of people who are wealthy, 65% to 85%, depending on how much they make, are first generation wealthy. Okay, this should encourage you to say, man, look at the opportunities that I'm born into, that we don't live in this static caste system. Mobility still exists, right? And that wealth is often determined by what availability to assets can you get. When I was younger, I knew that I should invest into mutual funds, but I didn't have a way to invest in mutual funds. Back in 25 years ago, when I discovered this, you needed a financial planner, you needed a couple $1,000s down. Now you can do it right on Robinhood. You could just buy index funds, or you can start a Roth IRA with Wealthfront, and putting a little bit of money aside, that money can grow and grow and grow. And $100 a month can turn into millions over the course of your life. Now, before we jump back into Barry's video, I wanted to add one more thing about the financial conversation. The reality is that most people tend to make more money in their lifetime as they get older. So if you think about yourself at the age of 18, or maybe you're 18 watching this video, you made substantially less money at 18 than you did at 21 or 22. And at 21, 22, you probably made less money than you did at 25. Most people end up making more money over the course of their lifetime. And that again, in my opinion, as a follower of Jesus, should enable and empower us to do good and to care for the least of these and to be charitable with what we've been given, as well as budget and plan and save and all the things that the Proverbs talk about. Let's jump back into this Reason TV video. He explains it this way.
So when looking at already flawed inequality statistics over the last 60 years, we're not looking at the same poor and rich people. If I told you that kindergartners today are barely taller than they were 50 years ago, you would not think I'm talking about the same kindergartners who are apparently trapped in the Hotel California of elementary schools. We're talking about a statistical cohort, but people move up and out of that cohort over the course of their lives. Between ages 25 to 60, 3/4 of Americans will fall into the top quintile of income earners for at least 1 year of their lives.
That's a lot. In the top 10% of income earners, he said,
5 to 60, 3/4 of Americans will fall into the top quintile of income earners for at least 1 year of their life. Now, to be clear, there is income inequality, but when you factor in taxes and the redistributive effects of our social safety net, that gap is not as catastrophically chasmic as often portrayed.
That's why it's not a conspiracy. It's a system. Furious at faces, blind to system.
Charles, how long have you known about Andrew and Epstein?
It's not a conspiracy because a conspiracy requires coordination. It requires people in a room deciding to do something evil. And some of that with Epstein, yeah, clearly happened. But the much more frightening truth is that most of what we're seeing doesn't require a conspiracy at all. You don't need a secret meeting to explain why wealthy, powerful men with access to private jets and a private island and a consequence-free environment might end up doing terrible things. You don't need a conspiracy to explain why politicians who received money from Epstein didn't ask where it came from. You just need a political system where campaigns are funded by the ultra-wealthy and nobody asks questions about the money.
Yeah, so I would grant all of that. I think that the issue is if you make the system the villain, you accidentally give real villains moral cover, right? So scripture doesn't allow us to outsource our soul. That's not how it works. Accountability remains personal. Every single one of us have to take an accountability, and there should be accountability for those people in power and who have abused said power. So now he's going to get into the factory that caused these conditions. He kind of alluded to it in the beginning. So now listen closely to what he lays out.
What are those conditions? What's the factory actually running on? 1, extreme wealth concentration. Right now, the top 1% of Americans own 32.3% of all wealth. The bottom 50% own 2.5%. Globally, billionaire wealth hit 18.3 trillion in 2025, which is up 81% since just 2020 in 5 years. The world's 12 richest people hold more wealth than the poorest 4.1 billion.
Yeah, and that's all terrible. The reality is, if the history is an indicator of the future, all of that will be squandered within a generation or two. All of that will not be stewarded well by the kids who take over these massive fortunes and end up having to run exorbitant amounts of money that they didn't have to work for or contribute to or build or innovate, right? Now, again, I'm not saying all those people were hard workers. A lot of them had, subsidies with the government. A lot of them had all sorts of advantages, but that is going to be squandered. That's just the reality of the situation. And many of these folks, the Bill Gates folks, and a lot of folks don't want to pass the wealth on to their kids. They want to give it away to philanthropy, right? I don't know which percentage of them do that. And so his next connection, I think here is pretty interesting.
2, we have a legal system that operates differently for the rich. Epstein's 2008 plea deal, 13 months work release, registered as a offender, but kept his wealth, his connections, his lifestyle. That isn't a failure of the legal system. That's the legal system working as it's designed when you can afford $1,000 an hour lawyers. 3.
Yeah, I think he's right there that there is very unjust and unequal accesses to legal counsel. I think that's fair. I don't think Epstein should have gotten that deal. I think that's an absolute travesty.
4, desperation at the other end. 60% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. The same system that concentrates wealth at the top produces economic desperation at the bottom.
So the reality is that, unfortunately, we have a system that does subsidize the wealthy. There's been bailouts of airline industries, of bank industries in 2008. All of that is true with the idea that, hey, some of these systems are too big to fail, these massive financial institutions. However, I don't think those two things follow. I don't think that because wealth travels up, that therefore the bottom is being taken advantage of. That's a wild conclusion when you factor in that, again, 79% of America's millionaires are first generation rich, 65% of America's billionaires are first generation rich, and you don't even have to aspire to be that. No one is saying you have to be that. You can go and provide for a family and work hard and live below your means, live a very simple life. Don't compare yourself to social media influencers. Don't compare yourself to how people are stunting on you. Live a very content, humble life. A lot of people do that. A lot of people aren't on social media. But this idea that because the wealth is traveling up for perhaps some tax loopholes that should be fixed, right? Borrowing against assets is how a lot of these folks don't pay taxes and are able to live these massive, lavish lifestyles. All of that can be true, but I don't think that those two things connect.
The same system that concentrates wealth at the top produces economic desperation at the bottom. And that desperation is what predators like Jeffrey Epstein exploit. He targets vulnerable young women who need money they couldn't get anywhere else. And 5, critically, the removal of consequences.
Okay, so I think the reality that this gentleman is missing, unfortunately, is that there's been trafficking throughout all of history. There's been sin against people throughout all of history, right? Predators existed in monarchies, under socialism, under communism, under feudalism, and under capitalism. The common denominator is unchecked power plus sin. That is the connection. Not saying this system is creating more of these factories for these predators. The system is going to be the system. Wealth concentration can be a risk factor, but it is not a sufficient cause, right? Access to excess is a risk factor, but we see folks with access to excess doing things like this in the scriptures. We see people wilding out in the scriptures, right? And so to connect this, that the generational churn, the redistribution undercut, then creates this permanent factory, I think is a narrative-driven thing, right? I think it's a need to drive a narrative and less about the facts of these situations with regards to, hey, when you allow people to have unchecked power and no one holds them accountable, they will do heinous things. You amplify the amount of money and they amplify the amount of power, and that's what will come downstream effects of it. This stuff being exposed, I think, is a good thing. I think it's awesome that we live in a time where this is finally coming to the light and people can see who are these elites and how are they moving and what are they into. And then we could be more intentional with our own support or lack thereof of these folks. So this is the Epstein economy that he lays out: concentration of wealth, removal of consequences, capture of politics, manufacture of desperation, normalization of defiance. And so this is what I would lean into. Some of these can be true. The removal of consequences is wrong, and that should not have happened. Obviously, if the dude is powerful, he's going to have a connection with politics. The manufacture of desperation. This is where I would disagree with. No one is manufacturing you to be desperate. Every single person is a free agent with choices and decisions that we all get to make. And we could all choose to live below our means and work hard and develop useful skills that are valuable to the market, extend our own network, keep our own dollars within our own microeconomies as followers of Jesus. And so we don't have to operate in a system of desperation. No one forces you. The system can tempt you, but the system can't make you do anything. The system can't make you do anything. And then he says the normalization of deviance. I don't know how much of this is normalized, but I would be curious to see how much of this is normalized within culture as a whole, within the wicked heart, that there's always been powerful men who've acquired tons and tons of women, that this has always been throughout human history. To say that this is now worse than it was before, I think is a very massive misread of history. I mean, you think about Genghis Khan and how many women he impregnated, where at one point a huge chunk of the human population today was like a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. This stuff is so wild throughout history, and to all of a sudden look at this in our modern sense and to assume that this hasn't been happening, I think is pretty wild. So now this is his conclusion, which I think is very interesting because he makes a pretty bold claim here. Check this out.
So think about the Epstein conversation right now. Millions of people posting, sharing, demanding the list, calling for arrests. And what's actually happening in terms of policy? Guys, what is actually happening in terms of policy, in terms of the structural changes that would prevent the next Epstein?
So he's talking about structural policies, but there's not even arrest happening. So you want to change policies, but we can't even have the people be held accountable, right? The elites aren't even, they wouldn't even redact the names. So again, my question is, why worry about all this stuff out there that you can't control. You could put pressure on the government, but he doesn't propose any policies in this video, right? And Gary's economics is the same thing. They don't propose any actual policies besides take more stuff from the rich and watch my stuff. I've made it, but you're probably not going to make it, so watch more of me. That's a lot. I mean, and Gary was called to that in his conversation with Diary of a CEO when he sat down with Daniel Priestley. It's like, hey, just what are your actual solutions? There's no solutions. What policies, right? That's the sad part.
Our anger is being composted into content, and I include myself entirely in this. I've been doom scrolling through all the names and connections for days, and what has it achieved? Well, I'm more informed about who was on a flight log.
Yeah, he's right. What is the point of consuming all this stuff, right? Just because outrage feels like action, that doesn't mean anything's actually happening. Okay, so here he explains to us how you fix all of this. Ready? You ready for it? Here's the fix of it. Now, remember, we've already talked about how in America, 60 to 65% of our budget, our federal budget, already goes to safety net programs. What are his big solutions?
You close it by getting money out of politics, and you close it by rebuilding the safety nets.
I'm with you in terms of getting money out of politics. I think there could be better checks and balances there. But then he says you close it by rebuilding the safety nets. We've already talked about income inequality. We've already talked about how much is going towards programs like aid, SNAP aid, and food and welfare, right? More than our military, by the way. We spend more on welfare than we do on our defense budget. A lot of people don't know that. In America. Can't speak to where he's at. So that's already happening. But his solution is, until we do this, until we fix it, we're all complicit.
So people aren't economically desperate enough to become victims. And you close it by recognizing that extreme wealth inequality isn't just unfair. It's a factory that manufactures abuse. The problem we have right now is we are living in an Epstein economy. And until we dismantle the Epstein economy, we're all complicit in building the next monster.
Yep. So he thinks we're all complicit until we build out more safety nets. So he's taking this exact thing and he's now pointed it towards the current systems of free markets, of capitalism, and we got to tax the rich more, and we need to redistribute more. And listen, I think if you want to have a conversation about some of those things, that's fine. The issue is that's not the actual problem. The deeper problem is outrage and fatalism. The deeper problem is that you're not actually going to do any of these things because you're not in a position of power or influence to do any of these things. So saying we need to spend more on safety, like even if you're for safety nets, more safety nets. Hey, Ruslan, like I know 65% of our money already goes into these safety net programs. I think 95% of our federal funds should go into the safety net. Like, let's just say that's your position. The issue is, if that's your position and all you have is outrage, you're going to package that with fatalism because you can't actually do anything about it unless you decide to run for president and fix all this stuff, which even if you do run for president, you're not going to fix all of this stuff because there's an entire 3 different branches of government here in America. What all of this is going to land at, generally speaking, is just more helplessness. You're learning to feel more helpless. And that to me is the deeper issue with all of this, is the more inundated you are with this information, the more helpless you're going to feel. And believing that your life is controlled by outside forces is a direct correlation to more depression. There was a study done about this, multiple studies done about this. One of the studies that I think about is the Benesi, Sweeney, and DeFore meta-analysis connecting the locus of control and depression. And what they discovered is that external locus of control strongly is associated with depressive symptoms, meaning that people who just think about everything out there and what's happening in this country and what's happening there and this thing and this, when you're just consumed with what's happening out there, you're gonna slide into more depressive symptoms. That's the mental health aspect of all of this, right? And that's the hopelessness theory that was explored. And so there's over 1 billion people on Earth today that are dealing with different mental health conditions. Much of this is connected to this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And when you tell an entire generation that the system controls everything and that you're complicit in this, unless you fix the system, which, how do we do that again? Oh, we don't really know. What policies are we presenting? Oh, we don't really know. Unless you fix the system, you're complicit. Oh, and by the way, the system is rigged and you can't win. That doesn't produce reformers. It produces despair. It produces people who are just more and more radicalized on the internet, rage baiting content that they're consuming, and now we're removing the diagnosis from a internal heart check that we all need to have to a political prescription with collective guilt. Everyone's guilty. Everyone's implicit in this. And so hear me loud and clear. Justice matters. Accountability matters. But you can't legislate holiness. You can legislate laws that prevent evil, but you can't legislate virtue. Okay? You get de-incentivize vice, but virtue is an overflow of a renewed and a redeemed heart. And so we have to enforce consequences, but we're not going to redeem hearts. Philippians 4, chapter 6 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. We see a mandate as followers of Jesus to channel our anxiety into prayer. And I would argue to take more ownership and have more agency over obsession of the latest story online. That's a process of renewing your mind. As Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Renew your mind, right? And if we look into the original Greek, and by the way, this is our trusty logo software. They're giving all you guys a free 60-day trial. This is one of my favorite softwares. I use it every day. I do my Devo on it every day. We have a Bible plan, read along. You can read through the Bible in 2 years, 5 days a week. That's available on there. And you can get the whole software for 60 days. One of my favorite things is looking up words in the original Greek. So I can look up the word mind, and you see the word mind.
Nous.
Intellect, your understanding, right? Your attitude, your thoughts, your thinking, your insight. Okay, it's connected to the word repent, which is interesting, right?
Metanoeo.
Which is metanoeo. So I love being able to go back into Greek. And so it's this mental attitude that we all need to be renewing. And then you could even see the other times that this word is used. Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. This is Jesus talking, right? Or this is talking about Jesus. Philippians, right? And the peace of God, which transcends all understandings, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is an awesome resource. And so I'm big on like, hey, what are we doing to renew our minds? What is our diet? What are we consuming every single day? Because if we're just absorbed with grievance as our identity, man, that is not a good place to be. That is not a good place to be. And so here's the deal. Wealth and inequality, in my opinion, have always been here. And it's sad, but that's the truth. You see it all throughout history, all throughout scripture. To say that the fact that that there are people that can be more wealthy or less wealthy, that there are people that can earn more or earn less, that there are people that maybe based on their life experience, maybe based on their skills, maybe based on their geography, tend to have a difference of income, unequal income, that is the engine that made Epstein. I don't think that's true. I think choices, character, and accountability is what, or lack of accountability is what made Epstein. Okay? The systems, there's checks, there's redistribution, there's mobility and responsibility, and all that's built into it. But you dismantle people when you erase personal agency and replace it with a fatalistic worldview. And that's my concern with this like type of thinking about all this sort of stuff. And again, it's not just Barry's paradigm of this. This is throughout all of space and time. Everyone is weaponizing this story against their own political opponent or ideological opponent. And speaking of choosing what we can control, that brings us from the economy, battlefield, and all the Epstein stuff to right at home, the family. Cutting off parents is now becoming more and more normal, and that should scare you. I've seen several of these articles that are trending. I went no contact with my mother 20 years ago. Now it's everywhere, right? And then there's this article on The Week, which is No Contact, Why Family Estrangement is Now on the Rise for Young People. So if the entire paradigm that many people are going through this life with is it's the system, it's the structures, all of this is going to spill into personal relationships, right? And so when you're trained to see life as powerlessness plus oppression, you start relabeling normal friction, normal things that we would all experience as kids growing up as abuse, normal boundaries as toxicity, and normal disagreement as unsafe. This sort of thinking does not heal anybody. It doesn't heal people. It freezes them. It stifles their development. And tragically, that's what the data is showing, is that all of this stuff is on the rise, that it's real, it's not rare, and it's increasing more and more, right? A large national survey of Cornell's work found out about 27% of U.S. adults report being estranged from one family member. Okay, the APA also summarizes this is a nationality representative finding and emphasizes how emotionally painful it is on both sides. And the sad part is, according to this article, is that advocates for the estranged have began a concerted effort to normalize it. They want to normalize you not talking to your family, right? And your family not talking to you over politics, over disagreements, over whatever, right? They believe eliminating the stigma would allow more people to get out of unhealthy family relationships without shame. So, to be clear, this is not just a niche on TikTok. This is now a mass level relational fracture, right? Fathers, unfortunately, are getting cut out at shockingly higher rates. Ohio State did an article doing some research and found out that out of these situations where people don't talk to their parents, only about 6% of these are from mothers, but 26% are from fathers, right? And so the same study also found that these aren't always permanent. A lot do reconcile, but in the process, the amount of pain and heartache that people go through in these sorts of situations, I think is just sad, right? And so some of these relationships may need some distance. Sometimes you may need to leave and cleave. Hey, grow up, graduate high school, get a full-time job, meet someone, get married, have kids, in that order. By the way, those are the 4 milestones of adulting. And there's a component of leaving and cleaving in that. But when you aren't living your life that way and you're just cutting people off with the slightest hint of disagreement, I think that's where it can get really dangerous, because then you're just reinforcing this echo chamber and this fatalistic mindset. Especially if someone's like, hey, I'm not there where you are with your empathy or with your politics or with your need to, hey, protect this marginalized group. But here's the thing, like when 1 in 4 fathers are getting iced out, we have to ask what's happening culturally, not just personally. And so politics is now a direct trigger for this, right? According to Time, reports in 1 of 5 of these situations usually are cited as political differences. And these breaks often involve blocking and total cutoff, right? So families, man, we used to argue and still eat dinner. Now you argue with somebody and they block you. You block each other, right? And that, I think, is a deeper victim lens trap that people are dealing with, right? Is that when you have these major reporting that's describing no contact and we need to normalize it and highlight it, and man, it's good. It's not good. Right now, again, I'm saying if there's real abuse that's happening, you need to have healthy boundaries. You may need to cut off some people if there's actual abuse happening. But if it's just disagreements, if it's just discomfort, if it's just, hey, they were imperfect parents, I don't think you need to go to cutting somebody off on those bases alone, right? The Atlantic notes that there's the rising estrangement research flags a cultural shift where families are increasingly expected to deliver total fulfillment and total agreement. And when they don't, people interpret that as disqualifying. Now, again, real abuse exists. Distance can be necessary sometimes, but discernment is dying. Not every discomfort is abuse. Not every conflict is trauma, and not every boundary is oppression. A lot of people are being discipled into, if you don't fully affirm my worldview, well, then you're an unsafe person. And if you're an unsafe person, then I can't be around you. So I think here's the big idea. We were created for community. We were created for family. We were created to do life with one another. And if your only acceptable relationship is one of total agreement, you'll end up alone convincing yourself that it's healing, and it's not. And I think it's directly connected that if you're offloading responsibilities to structures and systems, you start treating people like structures too, something to demolish. not someone to reconcile with, which is in direct opposition to what we see in Scripture. In Ephesians chapter 6, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your mother and father, which is the first commandment, with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on earth. It's interesting that Paul points out that this is the first commandment with a promise, right? Now, here's the thing. Honoring your parents is a posture, okay? It's not just about doing whatever they say. Boundaries can still exist, but contempt and anger can't be the default. And it's interesting that Paul is not saying to honor them only when they obey the Lord. It says, obey your parents in the Lord, for that is right. And I've had, some tumultuous seasons with my mom. I've had some hard times with her, and I've shared about some of it publicly, and some of it is just private. But I will say this, honor doesn't mean you pretend that sin is fine. That's not what honor means. It means you refuse to dehumanize the other person. Okay? It means that even when my mom was dealing with alcoholism, I still maintained some degree of communication with her, and that when she finally hit rock bottom and was ready to change her life, I was able to be a part of that journey and to honor her. And now on the other side of that, my mom's been sober. She's been clean. Several years ago, she started going to church. She's doing much, much better than she was, right around the pandemic when we were basically not talking in any ways. But I still kept that door open, right? I had to set some boundaries. I couldn't let her come around my family. I couldn't let her be drunk around me. But I had that door open, and now we're in a much, much better place. And I'm glad I didn't do this hard cutoff thing, right? So I think many of us need to be reminded that there's something in this command that is beneficial for us. That to honor your parents has a direct benefit on you, right? Paul says it's the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Now, just to reemphasize, this is not a command to get rid of discernment and to get rid of guardrails. That is not what I'm saying, okay? This isn't a blanket command to stay in danger. Listen to me. If there's violence, coercion, SA, ongoing craziness like this, you need to first get to safety, okay? You need to get help. You probably need to get authorities involved. Involve some wise counsel. Involve a pastor, someone that could advocate for you in these situations. However, the reality is that social media, unfortunately, has taught people to diagnose their parents from a TikTok video. And that though therapy language is helpful, and I go to therapy, some of you guys, those of you that are on Patreon, we have a free course with me and my therapist, Dr. Rudy. He'll be at the Bless God Summit. You guys know I am for having a solid Christian therapist, right? But if therapy language can be helpful until it becomes a weapon and you start diagnosing everybody but yourself. Some people call it boundaries, but sometimes it's just avoidance. And so this idea that cutting people off is going to heal you, it's not. It's just going to make you numb. A lot of people who may be chasing this no contact desire, perhaps beneath the surface, are really looking for safety, dignity, peace, sanity. But the tragedy is that good desire can get hijacked into a worldview that can't tolerate imperfection. And so it trades hard conversations for hard cutoffs. And I don't think that's right. Most families don't need these sorts of situations. They don't need a tribunal. They need repentance, humility, and a path back to the dinner table. A path back to, hey, we're going to have hard conversations without being hard on each other. And sometimes you might need to be hard on each other, right? Sometimes you might need to challenge somebody. But generally speaking, we're going to have hard disagreements, but we're still going to love each other, and we're not going to be nasty to each other. And even if we disagree, hey, that's okay. We could still love each other. We could still be family. But I think this is the pattern that many of us are seeing, is that when you're taught that everything is controlled by forces you can't change, you don't just get political, you get brittle. And brittle people break relationships instead of building them. And speaking of being brittle, that leads us to our next topic, which is one of the people that advocates the most, in my opinion, and has been on the woke right. System is rigged. The structures are set up against you. You can never get ahead. LOL to the idea of meritocracy. LOL to the idea that you can make a life for yourself. Meanwhile, they're worth tens and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, married to a lord. Of course, the lord, meaning the British lord, Candace Owens. And this week, it's finally starting to come out. Something that folks, anyone connected to the conservative media side of things is familiar with. Anyone that's connected to her via relationship is kind of familiar with. But now it's finally starting to hit the fans. You have ex-employees coming out and basically saying the quiet part out loud with regards to who she is and how she's navigating. Okay, so this is Graham Allen. He used to work with Candace Owens at Turning Point. And this went viral this week when he, on his podcast, I mean, he kind of crashed out and confirmed the worst kept secret in conservative media.
Right? That's what Candace Owens says all the time. So it's time to tell the truth. It's time to let the cat out of the bag. And here's the truth that no one has ever wanted to say for the entirety of the past decade. And that is Candace Owens this is the biggest kept secret inside the conservative movement.
I think it's the worst kept secret. I've been hearing about this stuff for years because I have multiple mutual friends with her, right? And this is how her friends speak about her.
Candace Owens has been the biggest thorn in the side, diva, absolute nightmare wrecking ball to the entire conservative movement behind the scenes for the past decade.
And now I think people are starting to wake up to it and see it with her recent attacks on Erica Kirk, her grasping at straws, trying to just create drama with people, her crazy theories. I think it's finally starting to come out. And it's interesting that now coworkers are coming out and potentially ex-employees are going to come out if those that aren't under NDAs.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Anyone who's not on record in front of a camera, they'll tell you the truth. Every single person that has ever worked with Candace Owens that's not still being paid by Candace Owens or has an NDA with Candace Owens, they can't stand her.
So maybe if this was just one person, it would just be gossip. But Graham Allen is not the only one. Ryan Fortner, who worked with Students for Trump, subsequently worked with TPUSA a lot and is very involved in that space, went scorched earth on her just today in a live interview. Here we go.
Nobody on the board of directors like Candace Owens. She was forced out of Turning Point USA because she is let me just say.
He said she was forced out of Turning Point. That would explain a lot. If that's true, that actually explains a lot if you think about it.
This, and I want this on the record.
This man said he wants it on the record.
She is a disgusting human being.
Sheesh.
She has no personality whatsoever. She is a nasty character. And I have nothing but disregard for her because everybody who gave her something, she took it away. She stepped on our backs to gain fame. She is a lying, phony bitch, and I want nothing to do with her. And I
do not encourage or endorse this sort of language. But this is the same woman that is saying absolutely heinous things about Erica Kirk, absolutely heinous things about the organization she used to work for, Turning Point. And she has heinous things to say about everybody that's ever given her opportunity, from Daily Wire to Dennis Prager. It really is sad that every single past person she's worked with, she's burned bridges with. And this has been said for years about her in terms of folks that know her, have been around her, have worked with her. Now it's starting to finally, I've never spoke on this publicly. Now that these coworkers are coming out, I think it's important to note, hey, many of the people that are feeding you this worldview, especially on the right, specifically Candace Owens, are not great people. They're not great, wholesome, humble, down-to-earth, approachable people. And speaking of being approachable, if you want to come hang with me at the Bless God Summit, we're having it just in 2 weeks here, March 5th, 6th, and 7th here in Oceanside, California. Myself, Wes Huff, Mike Winger. This lineup is absolutely stacked. Michael Knowles will be there. Ninjas and Butterflies are going to be there. Dr. Gavin Orland, KB, and Amin from Southside Rabbi. God Logic is going to be debating Jacob Hansen. This is coming up here in 2 weeks. Okay, now tickets are available. VIP is sold out, but general admission tickets are left. If you want to get a scholarship, you can still apply for a scholarship over at blessgodsummit.com. Scroll down and thank you to our amazing sponsors, Logos, Helping Captives. They have scholarships. We have a handful of these left. If you're local to Oceanside or you can get to Oceanside, cover your own travel, scroll down, hit scholarship application, then get a hold of me, shoot me a DM, message me on Patreon. I'm fairly easy to get a hold of if you didn't know. And I would love to get you guys to this event. Come hang out with us. All right, let's jump back into this conversation.
I want anybody in this movement to associate with her because I can't stand her. Well, and I will tell her to her face on a live interview if I have to. You.
So this is all really good. I want to be clear about this. I do not want anyone to fabricate stories about Candace Owens the way that she does about other people, but I do want people to finally speak out, and it seems like it's finally happening. You can see her style of making up news has not been tolerated anywhere that she's worked. That's why she's bounced around so much, and that's why she's now independent.
Yeah, shout out to Joshua Carr for putting this together. I think the floodgates are about to come. If some of these people start speaking out and they can figure out ways to get around their NDAs, I think it's going to be really, really bad. But I think that's the macro economy that we're in, right? It's just like outrage is addictive. They, them, hunting monsters, dopamine boost. This is the world and the climate that we live in, right? And I'm sharing this with you guys to show you that many of the people that are pushing this on you, and there's no redemptive quality on what they're doing. They're never pointing you back to anything transcendent or beautiful. It's they just become the source of everything. Oftentimes have other massive character issues, massive character flaws that are that affect people in a negative way. And eventually, hey man, what's done in the dark will come to the light. How you treat others is how you're going to be treated. Okay, and so none of this surprised me. I'm honestly surprised that it took this long for it to come out, because this has been, in my opinion, one of the worst kept secrets within this sphere in terms of the folks I know that work in this world. Folks have used the word diva to describe her for a very long time. So it's interesting that it's finally hitting the fan and people are talking about it. And I'm curious, those of you guys that are like Candace Owens stans, if this was substantiated as true, would it change any of your perception about her content? Because if this is coming from a person that's shallow and broken and they're just more rage bait, does that make you reevaluate your relationship with it, right? That would be my honest question. And speaking of good questions to ask, someone led to interaction between Elon Musk saying he believes in the teachings of Jesus and then Wes Huff reaching out to him. Okay, how awesome would it be to have Elon and Wes Huff talk about Jesus? This is how it all started. It says someone needs to evangelize Elon Musk. Who will lead him to Christ? And then Elon replied, I agree with the teachings of Jesus. Okay, now, we've seen the Babylon Bee guys share Jesus with him. I'm not sure if they were tongue-in-cheek, but they did. They asked him if he wanted to receive him. He says he believes in a God of Espinosa, I believe is what he said, which isn't the God of the Bible. But this was interesting to see him saying he agrees with the teachings of Jesus. And so a lot of people saying, hey, man, you're so close. Shout out to Michael Knowles. He says, always a good thing to do. By the way, Michael Knowles will be at our Bless God Summit as well. He's doing an armchair discussion with Gavin Ortland on Protestantism. What is the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism? So if you don't have your tickets for that, again, blessgodsummit.com. There's some general admission tickets left. VIP is sold out. But we do have virtual tickets now, by the way. If you didn't know, you can get the live stream and the replays of all the sessions on the virtual tickets. So anyway, props to Michael Knowles, who says, always a good thing to do, but if one of Jesus's teachings, and if teaching he repeats, is that he is God, what does that imply for our own lives and actions? What a great question. So many good questions being asked, right? Cleave to Antiquity, our new Orthodox homie over there. There's some C.S. Lewis quotes being dropped. And so the internet was like, man, this is so awesome. Elon saying that he agrees with the teachings of Jesus, but rightfully so. It's not just about agreeing with the teachings of Jesus. It's about making Jesus Lord of your life. And Wes Huff chimes in and says, still love to chat about this, Elon. Okay, would still love to chat about this. I haven't talked to Wes Huff about this. Maybe I'll ask him at the Bless God Summit when we do our panel, but would still love to chat about this. Does that mean that there was a potential conversation initiated? Did they cross paths? Is Wes Huff ready to share the gospel with him? Wes Huff's been on a generational run lately, sharing the gospel with Sean Ryan, Joe Rogan, Flagrant Podcast. It's been absolutely phenomenal to watch, but he says would still love to chat about this. Of course, Melissa Dotery chimed in. That's a funny meme. Do it. So a lot of folks, that should be pay-per-view. I love this. Elon Musk and Wes Huff, 4-hour, 20-minute podcast would be fire. I agree. If someone said 3-way discussion with Elon, Joe Rogan, make for a fantastic conversation. I agree. So here is where I think the disconnect is, right? Elon unfortunately recently is going through some controversy with the Epstein files, asking to go on the island, even though he said he never knew him. He did ask to go on the island with him. So I'm sure that's playing a factor into it. There's also all sorts of uncertainty with regards to his businesses. Likely he has, oddly enough, an estranged relationship with one of his kids who's, a part of the Transformer community. I think he was having a different issue with a different child's mother because she said she was going to potentially raise him in the same direction. So Elon's been going through it. Elon's been going through it for a while. And could this be a coming to Jesus moment? I don't know. I do think that Elon has lived the lifestyle of a rock and roll rapper, has a gajillion different kids by a gajillion different moms. But what I think is so interesting about this is him simply saying he agrees with the teachings of Jesus. Now, I want to expand on that because just believing in the teachings of Jesus is not enough, right? And C.S. Lewis coined this argument called the liar, lunatic, or Lord argument, the trilemma, a famous, often used, but also debated theological argument popularized by C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, which if you've never read Mere Christianity, you should read it. Go back, get the audio book. It's really awesome. I just recently went through it. It's a great book. It posits that because Jesus claimed to be God, which is what Michael Knowles was kind of hinting at, he was not just a good moral teacher, but must either be a deliberate deceiver, a liar, insane, a lunatic, or truly divine, Lord. Okay, the argument challenges the notion that Jesus was only a good, wise, moral teacher by arguing that such a person cannot make profound claims to divinity without being mentally ill or a liar. All right, and this has been, cited by all sorts of folks, right? The pushback to this is, well, maybe he was just a legend, right? Critics often are at a fourth category legend, arguing that the Gospels are not historically reliable records of Jesus' words, which is not true. I think if you look at the historical records, they are very accurate, reliable, more than anything else from antiquity. And when you press people about this, when Bart Ehrman got pressed on, hey, are the Gospels reliable? He basically had to concede that nothing from history is reliable, right? Like you shouldn't trust anything from history. I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me if I'm not being very specific, but Bart Ehrman, famous atheist agnostic, textual critic, always kind of poking apart the Bible, but then when challenged, usually says, more or less, even with all these things that he's picking apart, the Bible doesn't, this doesn't change any essential Christian doctrine. And then when challenged, I believe it was in his Jimmy Akin debate, whether or not this could be, if there's so many questions about the Bible because it was written, 20, 30 years, or the New Testament specifically, the Gospels were written 20, 30 years after the fact. Well, then based on that standard, you can't get history of Alexander the Great. You can't get all sorts of folks from history, historical accounts, because they were written way later with way less manuscripts. And to Bart Ehrman's credit, he was consistent in that and basically conceded that, you shouldn't trust anything from history we don't really know because there's less manuscripts and other documents, and they're written lifetimes away from the person that they wrote about. So I think that Elon asking this, whether he's a skeptic, whether he's drawing closer to Jesus, I don't know. Man, that's a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of access to give up in order to fully surrender one's life to Jesus, right? And I don't know if he has that in him. I don't know. I believe everyone can be saved. I don't know if that's going to happen for Elon. I would like to believe it will, especially if he has more and more conversations. But yeah, there's a lot of he's going to have to lay down aspects of his life that he's probably held near and dear, his intellect, the way he views marriage and relationships, which is the complete antithesis of Scripture, in my opinion. The coddling of adult content on X, and then the proliferation of AI-generated content on Grok. There's a lot he's going to have to unwind with his thinking and his approach with regards to this sort of stuff. So I would love to see him sit down with Wes Huff. I think that'd be fantastic. And I think if there's anyone that could close Elon on Jesus, it would be Wes Huff, But I think, man, when you have that much power consolidated, to our video that we talked about this earlier, right? The topic we hit earlier. I think it's a lot for someone to lay down their life in that sense. But I would love to see it happen. And I hope that Elon doesn't just agree with the teachings of Jesus, that he submits to the teachings of Jesus, that he makes Jesus his Lord. I think that would be a huge, huge win for his soul, first and foremost. And then on a broader scale, how much good could he do with the resources he's been able to amass? who knows what could happen. But you know, the thing that I find most encouraging is that you don't have to be Elon Musk to do good with the resources you amass. Every single one of us can take inventory of the time, talent, and treasure we've been given, being faithful in the little things. And as we get older, as we earn more money, as we grow our families, that every single one of us can make an impact and make a good contribution to society. And I believe that's ultimately what it means to live a life that blesses God. And that's some of the stuff that I'm exploring in my book, Godly Ambition, which I mentioned it earlier. Godly Ambition, Unlocking the Full Potential of Your Time, Talent, Treasure. It's a USA Today bestseller. You can pick it up at blessgod.co. While you're over there, you can also get your virtual ticket for Bless God Summit if you can't make it in person. We have limited edition signed copies at blessgod.co. You could also go to Amazon and get it for a little bit cheaper and get it probably a little faster to you, but it wouldn't be signed. And ultimately, listen, I think that's hopefully my contribution to you guys here, is that as much of the world we can't control, and as often as the world is going to be the world, there are things that we can't control. And my heart is that you would get a hold of that for your life, that you would unlock your potential, that you would unlock your purpose in Christ first and foremost. And then how does that look like towards stewardship and managing of what you've been entrusted with? And I had a blast putting that book together. It's doing really well, and I would love for you to read it. It's also available on Audible. I think it could really glue this together. Like if you're looking at all the Epstein stuff and it has you unsettled, please consider reading my book. Like I really mean that. And again, it's on Audible. You can get it up. It's like less than $20 on Amazon. I think it'd help you out. Also, again, just a reminder, Bless God Summit happening March 5th, 6th, and 7th here in Oceanside, California. Get your tickets. You can get your virtual tickets. blessgod.co for all of that information, or blessgodsummit.com. And I can't wait to spend some time with you guys in person. Again, if you're around ChosenCon, tap in, say hello. I'll be around the Thursday, Friday, and then I'll be at the Intentional Fatherhood Retreat on Saturday. All right? Love you guys. Peace.